This is Legacy Battle. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening on right now. I am Michael Adams, creator of Legacy Battle. My panelists tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King, Penn State Athletics, Kevin Adams, Steelers Nation South, Robert Kaufman. Our special guest tonight, we're joined by a 16-year NHL defenseman, played for 9 teams, including 3 teams that we're going to discuss in tonight's debate. Also, the Penguins, of course, you see the Mighty Ducks behind me. He was on there. He played for Ottawa, San Jose, Detroit. So, good list of teams there. He's a plus 31 on his NHL career. And knowing some of the teams that he played on, that's pretty impressive. So, he's got 2 gold medals, one from the 85 Junior Championships and the 94 World Championships representing Canada. He was taken 14th in the 1993 expansion draft. We got defenseman Bobby Dollas here. Bobby, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So tonight's debate, everyone, check this. This is an interesting topic here. We're going to be debating expansion teams of the 90s and which team was the best in the 90s. So we've chosen our 4 out of the 5 teams that had, or 6 teams, excuse me, that had come in. Nashville Predators didn't come in until 98, so they didn't have a lot of time in the 90s. Of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they may be the best team now for the last 10 years maybe, but in the 90s, they were not very good. And you can go back in our archives, check out what Dan Pupa had to say, and Peter Taglianetti as well, that they both were on some of the game Lightning teams. But we're going to jump into our debate. We'll have our Q&A after for Bobby about his career. And we're going to start this out with the Florida Panthers.
All right, the Florida Panthers came into the league 93-94 for their inaugural season. They made Miami a 4-sport city. That was pretty significant. Looking at the results of their first 7 seasons, I think they make a great case to be our top expansion team that we're talking about tonight. If you look at the average point totals per season, you've got the Sharks at 51, the Sens at 60, the Ducks at 72, and the Panthers are at a respectable 78.4. Also, those first 7 seasons, they never finished last place in their division. Meanwhile, the Ducks took last twice. Both the Sharks and Sens took last 4 times each. In Florida's inaugural season, they were just 1 game under 500, 33, 34, and 17. And their 83 points became the NHL expansion team record high, which stood for the next 24 years until it was finally beaten by the Vegas Knights. In that first season, they established an identity very quickly when coach Roger Nielsen implemented the revolutionary form of defense called the neutral zone trap, a method used to prevent the opposition from entering the area between the blue lines, and it led to bundles of turnovers for the Panthers. That trap was on full display in the 1996 playoffs. First, the Panthers took out Adam Oates, Ray Bourque, and the Boston Bruins in 5 games in the opening round. Next, they beat the top-seeded Flyers, minimizing Lindros, LeClaire, and company. And then they were able to upset Mario Lemieux's Pens in the Eastern Conference Finals, earning in just their 3rd season a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals. Other cool aspects of this franchise, they spawned a wild goal celebration. Scott Mellenby literally killed a live rat with his hockey stick in the locker room prior to a game. He goes on to score 2 goals that night, and John Van Beesbrook coined the term rat trick. Next thing you know, the Florida fans are throwing rubber rats on the ice after every goal. And how about the original logo for the Panthers? I always thought it looked really awesome. You got the snarling panther, jumping right at you, leading with the sharpened claws. So we've got the most consistent success. We've got the deepest postseason run. We've got a revolutionary defense. We've got the rat trick, and we got a badass logo. So you got to go with the Panthers tonight.
So, Bobby, we know that winning starts with goaltending.
I'm looking at the 4 teams we're going to discuss tonight, and in the expansion drafts, I don't think anyone got a better goalie to start off than John Van Beesbrook. So what are your thoughts on that and the Florida Panthers run there in the 90s?
Well, I'll tell you what, the difference between the Florida Panthers and the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, which was the same year, is that the Florida Panthers went with a lot of veteran guys. Anaheim went with a little bit younger team, guys that were fourth line guys, young youth, more of a youth movement, plus a very tough hockey team. We decided that they wanted to be tough. We had pound for pound probably one of the toughest team, if not the toughest team in the league, and we proved it playing in the Western Conference against some of the big time tough guys. We had Stu Grimson and Todd Ewan and Robin Bawa, a whole bunch of tough guys able to play a different game. I think Florida did play very well for a certain time, but what happened with Florida is they ended up hitting a wall really quick after those guys started to get a little bit older, and all of a sudden they just fell off the map. You know, where I think we're Anaheim, myself personally, I think they started to steadily had a plan. You know, they had a good foundation with Cormier and Solani, and then they just built up from there. You know, Guy Hebert, I mean, you guys, you know, John Van Biesberg a lot more being on the East Coast, but Guy Hebert ended up being an all-star himself, a top-notch goalie for a long time. You know, in the expansion year, we had Ron Tugnut, who was tradable material, ended up getting a good player for him also, which was a great goalie. So it was a pretty solid team. It just took a little bit of time for, you know, Timu and Korea show to take off. Now, the difference is, I don't think there's much of a difference. I think both teams were fairly successful early, especially in merchandising and exposure. And to be biased, I think Southern California was a great place to play. It really was, you know, owned by Disney. It really was a great place to play. I miss it every day, trust me.
And what were your thoughts on the neutral zone trap? I personally was not a fan of it. The NHL did everything after that lockout in 05 to get rid of it. I mean, what were your thoughts on it as a system? Do you think it was bad for the NHL?
Well, I think it was part of the growing of the NHL, and why I say that. When I first came in the league, everybody was doing 2-1-2 dump and chase forecheck because there was a lot more arenas that were a lot smaller ice surface. You know, the Boston Gardens, the Buffalo Odd. What else was there? A Chicago Stadium. These places were like playing in a pinball machine. So a trap really wouldn't help in those scenarios because there was nowhere to go anyways. But what ended up happening is, you know, everybody had a standardized arena after a little while, a certain styles. And with expansion, it really thinned out we'll call it the caliber of player. And some teams that were weaker had no choice but to be competitive and to trap. If you didn't trap, you couldn't play against the top-notch teams back in the day. You know, we just talked about, you know, Pittsburgh got eliminated. There's no way Pittsburgh gets eliminated if the trap didn't exist. I mean, that's just the way that team was geared to play hockey. Edmonton Oilers, you know, they eventually started to get, you know, started to get beat out. Why? Because teams started playing tighter checking game. So the trap was part of the game. I think that what really changed the game, it was eliminating the red line. That's what really made the big difference. The stretch plays, you could trap all you want. You could not make, you could get away with making one pass with the trap now with no red line. Before you could not. You had to tic-tac-toe it all the way out of the zone, which I think the passing was much better than today's passing. But now it's, you know, it's become a hybrid. And there's still a 1-2-2, but it's a different variation of it, right? It's a momentum 1-2-2. It's not stationary. It's not plodding along. It's a little bit more forcing their teams to make mistakes, but with a lot more speed coming at you. So the game has really transformed a lot. I personally, I miss a bit of the old part of the game. I enjoy a lot of the new part. I wish they could come up with a better scenario because I find it's too much stretch passes for my liking, which gets a more limited player. Just turn your blade and just go forecheck. So that's the part that I disagree with. But you can't have a perfect world, right?
Right. Well, let's move on to our next team tonight, and that's going to be the oldest team we're talking about tonight by 1 or 2 years there, San Jose Sharks.
San Jose Sharks debuted in the 91-92 season, the season that my Penguins secured their back-to-back Stanley Cup title. But with their first pick ever, they picked Pat Falloon, and they debuted with Pat Falloon and future Hall of Famer Doug Wilson that led that team. That team won 17 games their first season, and then they followed that up with 11 wins the next season. They have an NHL record, 71 losses, 32 at home. But the following year, they made the playoffs. And in that year, they had one of the greatest upsets of all time. They got to face the Detroit Red Wings, who were the Western Conference points leader. They were the NHL's highest scoring team by 50 goals, and they took them to 7 games. And in that 7th game, at Joe Louis Arena, the Sharks on Jamie Baker's game-winning goal upset who many had picked as the Stanley Cup winner. Sergei Nabokov was the star of that series with 6 goals in 7 games. But unfortunately, that great win, followed up with a loss to Toronto in the following round. But following that playoff, they made the playoffs next year. They missed it 2 years, but they had followed up with 4 straight playoff appearances to end the 90s. And despite losing 129 games in their first 2 seasons, they actually led the NHL in merchandise sales. And they were second across all 4 major sports, behind only the Chicago Bulls, who were in their first part of their three-peat with arguably the world's most recognizable athlete, Michael Jordan. So they were second. They were second across all major sports leagues in merchandise sales. They also, in 97, 98, drafted Patrick Marleau, who is the NHL's all-time leader in games played, who passed Gordie Howe. And, he's the Sharks' career leader in points, games played, power play goals, and obviously games played. So Sharks.
So that upset of the Red Wings was so good, it made our greatest upset show. Check that out in the archives with Darius Kasparaitis. Bobby, San Jose Sharks, their first season, every time I looked at the scorecard, it was like 8-1, 6-2, 10-3. It was not pretty in their first year, but they turned it around. I mean, what were your thoughts on the San Jose Sharks as a whole there in the 90s? They did get better. They kind of had a mix of young and old talent. It was a very unique team.
Well, myself personally, I know we're talking only about the 90s, but even until today, I believe the San Jose Sharks have been the most underachieved organization in an expansion. And why I say that is they really never had an identity. They thought they had an identity, and they still didn't have an identity. And they came very close in the last few years, but until that, really nobody ever really took them seriously. And, I remember that playoff run you're talking about. And I think that, a lot of guys had career years that year. They overachieved in a lot of ways. But as we all know, during the long term and the long runs, cream always rises to the top. So you saw that they overachieved one year. They finally made it to the playoffs, and they went back to reality, who they really were. And that was a team of mishmash players. I think they had their coaching was a little bit suspect at times. In my opinion, the really only thing I really remember a lot about the Sharks in the 90s is they had one of the toughest guys in the league, which was Link Gates. That guy, before that car accident, he was a guy that I saw fight Bob Probert live, and it was like, wow, who is that guy? And but other than that, they did make some good draft picks, pick up some, Patty Marleau and all those guys later on. But it's really been a team that really hasn't had identity. Who are the San Jose Sharks? We never took them seriously. Even in Anaheim, we were more worried about the Kings than we were about the Sharks. And that's the way I think everybody treated them. They were really, it's a Rodney Dangerfield team. Nobody respected them for the longest time. And, they came very close recently, but now they've gone back to who they were again. No identity, and mishmash of players, really nothing going forward. And it's unfortunate because, like you said, it's one of the top logos. I think the Mighty Ducks logo just smashed them when they first came in, but that I could be wrong. I don't think so. But, San Jose, for me, it's a bit of a stretch to say they're one of the best teams in the 90s. That's for sure.
We've said this on plenty of shows before. you get a hot goaltender, you can beat anybody, and that's what happened with the Sharks. Urbe
Yeah.
was just on fire. But well, let's move on to the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim.
Yeah, repping the old jersey here. Gotta love it. Mighty Ducks, founded in '93 by Walt Disney. The franchise was awarded by the NHL in December of '92. In March 1st, '93, the brand new the Pond Arena was located near Disneyland, and that's where the team's name was announced. The team was inspired by, obviously, the 1992 movie Mighty Ducks. The Ducks had brought in Jack Pereira, who actually helped create the expansion team for San Jose, to be their general manager. The Ducks selected Ron Wilson to be their first head coach in team history. The Ducks and the Florida Panthers, they filled out their rosters in the '93 expansion draft and the '93 NHL entry draft. A focus was on defense, led by picking up goaltenders Guy Hebert, Glenn Healy, being their first picks, followed by Alexei Kostotanov and Stephen King. The Ducks selected 4th overall pick Paul Correa, who would turn out to be obviously the face of the franchise for many years. The resulting roster actually had the lowest payroll at the time of only $7.9 million. So that's pretty impressive,
Crazy, isn't it?
considering their record that year, smashing the expansion team wins record with 33 wins, which the Panthers also got that season too. They both tied with 33 wins. But they had a nice 1-2 punch in the '90s with Correa, Solane in that first decade. They would both win individual awards. Solane won the Richard Trophy, Rocket Richard. The team was led by Troy Loney as the captain, though. They finished, like I said, with 33 wins. The Ducks sold out 27 of 41 of their home games that season, including the last 25, filling the Arrowhead Pond at 98.9% of the season capacity. Their licensed merchandise shot to #1 in sales among all NHL clubs. They actually accounted for 80% of the NHL's merchandise sales. 80%, just one team, which is pretty impressive. Then in the shortened season, 94-95, that's when Paul Correa debuted. He had played 47 of the team's 48 games, scoring 39 points, 18 goals. Within the first 10 years, obviously, they didn't win any championships, but they did in the first decade win the Western Conference title, and then they would later win the Stanley Cup 3 years after that. They are the 5th fastest expansion team to win a Stanley Cup in the history of the NHL, which is pretty impressive. Brotherly Puck listed them as the #3 best expansion team in the history of the NHL. Without a doubt, the Ducks are one of the most recognizable of the NHL expansion teams in the '90s.
So, Bobby, I mean, of course, we're going to want to hear about the dynamic duo there that you guys had. But my first question would be, there's some Penguins fans here. Troy Loney was the original captain there. How did he do as captain? And tell us about the dynamic duo and your time there in Anaheim.
Well, the first thing when I met Troy, I went up to him and shook his hand and said, "Troy, good scrap." Because the last time I played against him, I ended up fighting Troy Loney. We ended up being on the same team. And it was, Troy was a great guy. Honestly, he's one of the nicest guys that in the NHL. Not too many guys will be saying anything bad about the guy. He was a true competitor. He was one of the veteran guys. I think he was him and Randy Ladouceur, I think, were the oldest guys on the team at that time. And Troy was getting up there in age, and also he was having trouble with his knees a little bit, and it was you could tell that he was a little bit tough for him at times, but great guy, great captain, pure professional. I can only say good things about Troy. Going into expansion, we didn't know what to expect. I mean, I'm sure Florida will tell you the same thing. You just don't know what to expect. We knew what the Sharks did, and in the past we're going, oh, we can't be that. We need to be better than that. And going in, when I got picked up in expansion, I knew I was going to go in expansion. I just didn't know where. And I heard that I went to Anaheim. I was disappointed because I'm an East Coast guy. I wanted to go to Florida. And then when I got to California, they brought the whole team in, and we're driving down from the airport, was at John Wayne Airport, and I'm looking out there and seeing all the palm trees and near the ocean, and I'm going, I think I'm going to like this place, And we ended up going to we all met together for the first time, and it was instant chemistry. You know, we had the 25th anniversary a couple of years ago, and it's like we never stopped seeing each other. It was like from day one we were best buddies. We went through tough times together, you know, in Anaheim in the beginning, and we really fought through it. It took us 2 years to, you know, the third year we ended up making the playoffs. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Thomas Sandstrom came to our team from Detroit after winning the Stanley Cup. When Detroit beat us the year before in the second round of the playoffs, they beat us 4 straight, but 3 of them were there in overtime. We lost in overtime to them. And that was the year that they finally won the Stanley Cup, was that year. And I talked to Sandstrom, and he goes, do you realize out of all the teams we played, Anaheim was our toughest series by far. And they beat us 4 straight. You know what? It was a war against those guys. And that's how we created our identity. It was a hardworking team with some skill. You know, we had Yari Curry came in, Brian Bellows came in, some of the older guard that really helped us push us over the hump. And for myself personally, I have only good memories about Anaheim. I mean, it was the best. The coaching staff was great. Jack Ferraro, who you mentioned, was a great guy. You know, there's so many things that were so good there. A beautiful arena. It was top notch in the league at that time. Only good things. And you know, when they picked up Teemu Selanne, they ended up getting him for Chad Kilger. You know, Chad was a great guy. And Oleg Tverdovsky, he went the other way also. I remember it's like, okay, we lost 2 good young talents, but when Teemu came in, it's like, whoa, all of a sudden we went from pretender to contender overnight. I mean, and you know, the stats speak for themselves. Those 2 guys plus a mishmash of other guys, you know, we end up getting, you know, Freddie Olsen came in, JJ Daniel, a bunch of good players started coming in, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, what a team. And, you know, to touch on that subject about the lowest salary in the league, I think the highest paid guy at that time was making about $350,000 in Southern California. Imagine nobody was buying Bentleys and big Mercedes. It was all comfortable and, you know, economical, and that grew exponentially. When, you know, I'll touch on a quick story. When Paul Kariya was holding out for his contract, you know, it was Michael Eisner said, "There's no way I'm giving a young guy $2 million a year." He held out. We ended up going 1-9. They signed him really quick, and all of a sudden the team took off again. I mean, it was not a coincidence. That's how good those guys were. And you know, for myself, again, it was a great memory. And I'm a little bit biased, but I think that, you know, Anaheim was up there with Florida and, you know, the next team coming up, which is Ottawa.
Some of that Disney money, they could afford to pay whoever they want, right?
Yeah, but you know what, Disney, the reason why they had a lot of money is because they didn't like to spend it. They like to keep their money. Trust me on that one.
Well, let's move on to our final team tonight. That's going to be the Ottawa Senators. So 92 expansion draft, they came in with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They did get the first pick in that expansion draft. They took goalie Peter Sidorkovich. Later on in that draft, they picked up Sylvain Turgeon, who's a very solid player. Mark Lamb, I was always a fan of his. Their first captain was Laurie Boschman. The longest tenured captain in the 90s was Randy Cunningworth. So their best season in the 90s was 44 wins, 15 ties, 103 points, and that came in 1999. They were 3rd best in the league that year, and they won their division. They made the playoffs 3 times in the 90s. They did win 1 round. The team's first ever draft pick, and things didn't start out very well for Ottawa. First draft pick was Alexei Yashin, and basically there's stories as to why he couldn't come over from Russia, but let's just say he couldn't get out of Russia. So we'll say that and go with that for now. But this is a guy who went on, he got over 400 points in the 90s once he did get there. But you team that up, and then he was their very first pick, and then the next year, their first overall pick was Alexander Digg. He's called a bust. He was supposed to be like, you know, there were comparisons to some of the great players at that time. I'm not one of the people that consider him a bust. I don't think someone who spent 9 years in the NHL and he had two 20-goal seasons. I don't think that's a joke. I don't think that's a bust. I think it's not a number one pick overall career, but it's a very solid NHL career. So I hate when people get down on him a lot. But 92, 95, between those years was just disastrous. But 96, they brought in a new coach, Jox Martin. He took them to the playoffs every season that he was there. Standout players in the 90s, I already mentioned Yashin. They had Sean McEachran, who scored 95 goals from them. Daniel Alfredson came in the 90s, 269 points during the 90s. Defensively, Wade Redden, very solid defenseman, 117 points, plus 24. Jason York had 102 points. He was plus 14. Their best goalie in the 90s, it's got to go to Ron Tugnut, 72, 51, 25 with a 2.32 goals against, a 906 save percentage. So that's pretty solid for that era. I'm not going to say that Ottawa was the best team in the 90s, even though that's my argument tonight. I think they had a really bad start, much like San Jose. But once they made that coaching change in 96, they may have been the best team moving forward there in the rest of the 90s. So we'll see what everybody's opinion is on that. But Bobby, so I come to you with Ottawa. Much like San Jose, they were not very good at the beginning. I want to say it was like 9 wins, 12 wins, 10 wins. Those first few seasons were disastrous. I mean, what were your thoughts on the Ottawa Senators?
Well, you're right. In the beginning, it's a disaster for most teams. I mean, what Florida did and Anaheim did, and even Vegas did now, it's an exception to the rule. Let's just call it that, because you really don't know what you're going to get. You know, you end up getting a lot of fillers, a lot of guys you're just unsure, or they had potential and it just didn't go where they went. I thought that, I know you touched on Alexander Day. I believe he was a very good hockey player. I really do. But, I didn't know him personally, but the rumor mill around him was his priority was not hockey. And I think that was his biggest hiccup. His priority was business, was about popularizing himself, making himself a commodity, if you want to call it that. And I think he overstepped his. I think he should have been more patient, build a hockey player first, and the rest will follow. And I think he got confused in his career. And I think guys, teams didn't take him seriously. Well, if you're not going to take the game seriously, we don't want to take you seriously. So it really snowballed into that. And unfortunately for him, he fell in that trap. Myself personally, I got picked up as a free agent. I was in Manitoba. I believe at that. No, I was in Long Beach, or was it Manitoba? I was one or the other. And Ottawa picked me up, and they say, come on out, and they signed me to a contract. But I knew at that time, it was 2000, 2001. And I knew at that time that San Jose was also interested in me. But, ended up that, Ottawa picked me up. I ended up playing one game against the Rangers, had a great night. I had like 1 assist or 2 assists, and I was +2 that night. And the very next day, we're playing against Nashville at home. So I'm at pregame lunch. I get a phone call at the restaurant. It was Marshall Johnson called me up and said, Bob, you got picked up in an expansion on waivers. I go, what do you mean? He says, well, we didn't protect you, thinking nobody was going to pick you up right away. I had like 48 hours to get picked up. So the very next day, I said, Marshall, I don't want to go, because Ottawa was that close to winning a Stanley Cup. They ended up going to the finals. That's the time when they went to the finals a couple of years in a row and just couldn't pull the trigger. So I knew maybe I could be that guy to help them out to get to that next level. I'm not saying I'm a difference maker, but they were missing a little bit of North American grit on the back end. And I was hoping to be that guy. I ended up going to Calgary 24 hours later, which was I was disappointed. And I thought that spurt their late 90s, early 2000s. Ottawa was a team to be with, with Jacques Martin and gang. It was a great hockey team back then. And they lost a little bit of their identity with time going on. And then it became a little bit inconsistent, and they are where they are today because of, I think, personally, I think because of management and how it was mismanaged in a lot of ways. So they end up going in a bunch of different directions, different coaching staff, different management, different personnel. And it's pretty hard to build something consistently when you don't have that kind of solid foundation. So at one point, I think Ottawa was one of the better teams.
Well, let's move into our vote tonight. Gentlemen, you cannot vote for your own. Kevin, you're up first.
Kind of debating between Florida and Ottawa. Ottawa, man, that some of the players you listed off there, that's pretty impressive. I don't know. I feel Florida though was a little bit more successful up front early on, so we have to go with Florida.
Okay. Rollo?
I gotta go with the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim.
Brian?
Yeah, I got to go with the Ducks too. I mean, that whole thing, the transition and from the movie into making the franchise and just taking off and having a lot of success. Definitely the Ducks.
So I was debating coming into this. I wanted to hear the arguments like I normally do, but I find the Ducks and Panthers to be pretty even as far as that goes. I guess I'm going to vote for the Panthers only because they did make it to that one Stanley Cup in the 90s. So I give them just the slightest of edge. I think Anaheim had better players throughout the 90s, if we're looking as far as a roster goes. But making it to the Cup, 3 years in? I think, yeah, they're 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Third season, yeah.
Third season. That's pretty impressive. And you mentioned who they took out. And, yeah, I didn't like the trap. And I don't think – I mean, Colorado pretty much obliterated them in the finals. And I don't think they would have beat Pittsburgh if Ron Francis was in that series. But I'm going to give my vote to the Panthers. Bobby, you can pick any of the teams. You can break our tie. Who are you going with?
Well, for myself personally, I mean, I don't want to be a homer and say Anaheim and stuff like that. I'm trying to weigh
be a homer.
The whole picture. I'm trying to weigh the whole picture. And I'm gonna say that I'm gonna say late 90s, early 2000s. I really thought that Ottawa was a very good hockey team. I know we're not talking 2000s, but they sort of it was there. That was their little sprint. They picked up a lot of great hockey players. I mean, Anaheim got Teemu through a trade, but Ottawa did draft and groom a lot of their players. I mean, they became a really good solid hockey team. So all that being said, I'm going with the guy with the funny iTech helmet behind you.
Okay. So that's 3 for the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim and a win for the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim tonight. Kevin got that win. So let's move into our Q&A. Kevin, you get first question for our guest.
So, what was your most memorable season throughout your NHL days, and why?
Well, I really think for myself personally, it was the expansion year in Anaheim, believe it or not, and why? Because of it was a bunch of guys like myself. I belonged to Detroit. I couldn't beat Nick Lidstrom out of a job. I couldn't beat Constantine out of a job. Brad McCrimmon was an established veteran. Steve Chason was a great hockey player back then. I just couldn't crack that lineup. And going to Anaheim, we basically showed up there and, Ron Wilson said, "Who wants a job? It's here. There's no veteran here. There's no anybody who wants to play is going to play." And I took it as a challenge. I'm a guy that doesn't like to lose at any time. I went in there with an open mind. I said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to help, Anaheim win. And, for myself personally, my career, I mean, going into Anaheim at that time, I think I had 130 games, 140 games, and I ended up finishing with 650 after that. So Anaheim really helped kickstart my career at an older age. It's like me coming out of college, and all of a sudden I was 25 years old. Here's a job for you. Now go out and earn it. And I took full advantage of it, played 500 games plus after Anaheim days.
So we'll go Brian, Rollo, me.
Okay, Bobby, in 1998, you were dealt to the Edmonton Oilers, and then you were part of a great opening round playoff series as your 7-seed Oilers upset the 2-seed Colorado Avalanche, winning Game 5, Game 6, and Game 7. So what was it like to be a part of that, and what sparked that great comeback in that series?
Well, I'll tell you what, we knew we had a very good hockey team. You know, we were, I don't think we were Stanley Cup favorites, let's say at that time, but I really believe that we thought we had a great hockey team. We could beat anybody at any time. You know, our Achilles heel at that time in Edmonton was the Dallas Stars. I mean, it was, you know, but they were a veteran team. They were a great team. They ended up winning the Stanley Cup. They, you know, they went to the finals. It was a team that was tough to beat because we lacked a lot of experience. And, you know, we beat Colorado because I thought we wanted a lot more at that time. You know, we were a great hockey team. We knew it. You know, a quick story, Game 7, Glenn Sather comes down. He says, if you score 4 goals against them and you win, I'm going to give you a flight anywhere Canadian Airlines fly each for 2. And he says, if you shut them out, I'll give you each a set of golf clubs at the same time. We end up winning 4-0. We got both.
Wow.
In Game 7. It was a great, you know, it was a great time. I was a little bit disappointed when I got traded out of Edmonton because I knew that team was very, very good. And I asked Glenn Sather, I said, Glenn, why did you trade me? He says, Bobby, he says, it's budget. Here it's budget in Edmonton. You know, they didn't have much money. I was making a certain amount of US dollars back then. It wasn't high for the NHL, but for Edmonton it was. I ended up going to Pittsburgh, which was a great experience for myself too. I had a great season in Pittsburgh. I enjoyed it very much, you know, playing with Jagger, Kovalev, and, you know, Straka, Lang, the list goes on, Hatcher. I mean, that was another team that was very, very close, I think, to winning a Stanley Cup. And I think the Achilles heel at that time, I thought, you know, Tom Barrasso was a little bit on the way out a little bit, and they hung on to him a little bit too long. And I think that cost us going forward in that time frame.
Rollo.
Bobby, you played in a bunch of great hockey towns with some really passionate fan bases. Which hockey fan base did you enjoy playing in front of the most?
That's a great question. I played in a lot of hockey crazy spots, if you want to call it that. You know, I played in the Battle of Alberta for both teams. You know, I played with the Nordiques when I played against the Montreal Canadiens. People don't realize how bitter that was, that rivalry right there. They really we just didn't like it. I mean, I ended up fighting John Cordick, who was a roommate the year before with me. We ended up fighting each other because it was the Battle of Quebec. You know, playing in Pittsburgh, the rivalry of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. You know, Eric Lindros was there. We had Jagger. It was bitter out there. I played in so many rivalries. It's crazy. Anaheim with LA. It was an instant rivalry. Instant. You know, even though it was, you know, the Kings went to the finals the year before. We were at Anaheim. We ended up beating them a couple times that year. The following year, it was that kind of rivalry. Now for fan base, oh, that's a tough one. I mean, Pittsburgh was great. Anaheim was crazy. There's so many of them. It's so hard to choose one because I really believe that doesn't matter where you play. If your team is a winning team, you got great fans. I mean, it was great. Pittsburgh, we had a great hockey team. The fans were very accommodating. You know, Edmonton and Calgary, when I was there, the fans were hockey crazy. That Canada was a great place to play. Can I really put my finger on one? I really can't. I mean, unless you really go to some places where, you know, they just weren't that great. I mean, I know we talked about expansion in Florida. Until recently, they've had some good teams, and the fans have it's always been the other team's jerseys. I mean, you can't really choose Florida as a fan base, you know, but other teams, I can't put my finger on one. I really can't because there's so many great ones.
So you mentioned Canada. Let's talk about the 94 World Championships. You get a gold medal. Team's great performance, especially by Bill Ranford, friend of the show, been on the show. He's a good guy. You win in shootouts against Finland, and that was I couldn't believe this when I saw this. That was Canada's first gold since 1961 at the World Championships. I was absolutely shocked when I saw that. You guys must have shut Canada down when you won that one. But I assume you still have your medals, but what did it mean to you to be part of that team? I mean, just almost an all-star team. You guys were stacked. So just your thoughts on that performance and winning the gold medal.
Well, I'll tell you what. For just going back down memory lane, I remember they flew in a guy from the Trail Smoke Eaters who was on that 61 team to talk about the championship. And that's how it was. This old guy shows up. This is how it was. It was the best feeling. And for the longest time, Canada never really won because they never really took it serious. I think in a lot of ways they didn't take it serious, and also they weren't NHL guys. I mean, when I went my year, first of all, it was an honor and a privilege for myself. A guy that was playing in the minors a year or two before, and all of a sudden I'm playing with the best NHL players in the World Championships. I went from obscurity to like being recognized as a good hockey player, and I went over there. I was pegged to be seventh defenseman, 7-8 defenseman, and I played my way onto there where I think I became in the top 5 guys. I wasn't there as an offensive threat. I was there as a shutdown, steady Eddie type guy, and I did the job for them. To win that championship, I think that's one of the highlights of my career, going, like I said from before, from obscurity to winning a gold medal for Canada, and for a championship that the Europeans really take seriously. I mean, for them, World Championships are more important than the Olympics. That's how it was for them. So when we won it, it was really quite a feat. And like you said, Billy Ranford was unbelievable back then. He was a force. He was a force. Luc Robitaille, unbelievable player. And you go down the list. If you really go and you go on internet and you look at that lineup of players, you look at all those guys. A lot of the guys could be in the Hall of Fame or close to it. And that's how good that team was. And we went over there, and Finland was a great team, and we ended up beating them in a shootout. I don't agree with the shootout myself personally. I'm glad they've done away with that finally, because it's really not really a sad way to decide who's the champion. So, but that was a great feeling back then.
One more each, guys, same order.
So you played defense, and I know the goalie and defenseman relationship is very important. So who would you say was the best goalie that you played with in the NHL, and in regards to communicating with each other and helping each other out?
Well, I'll tell you what, Guy Hebert was a very good goalie, very vocal, talked a lot. Billy Ranford, great goalie, talked a lot. Who else is there? I play with a lot of, let's face it, goalies are a little bit special breed, right? They're not all normal. That being said, I play with Brian Hayward in Winnipeg, great goalie. I'm trying to think of who would be the best one that I played with. Well, I mean, I played with Grant Fuhr his last year in Calgary. He was on the way out, so he had bad knees. He was not the same Grant Fuhr when I played against him when he was in Edmonton. That's for sure. That guy was an acrobat all over the place. So, Nabokov in San Jose was a great goalie also. There's so many good goalies out there. The ones that I think that are great goalies are the ones that are vocal out there, that talk to the defensemen a lot. They don't try to be fancy out there. They just do what I always tell goalies when I'm coaching them. Hey, look, I'm not going to be on your back. You have one thing and one thing only to do: stop pucks. You stop pucks the first shot, and you can see you stop them. And anything else, I demand defensemen to stop it. You can't always do it, but your goalie has to give you a chance every single night. But there were some great goalies that I played for.
Bobby, if I'm not mistaken, you're a native of Montreal.
Yes.
But despite playing for all those different teams, you never played for the Canadiens themselves. But what was it like to actually have the opportunity to call games for the Canadiens with TSN 690? That had to be a cool experience.
Well, my last year, I had an offer by Réjean Houle for 1 year for the Canadiens. I did have it, and I turned it down. They wanted to pay me in Canadian dollars at that time. I think it came out to about 500 Canadian back in the day. And I ended up signing with San Jose, and I was making, I think, 550 or some of that. And what the difference was is I got San Jose to commit to the first $2,500 towards my rent. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything under 3,500 in San Jose. That's how expensive it was.
Wow.
But back to your question is, I as you can tell, I like to talk, and I like to talk hockey. I could talk hockey till tomorrow. I like to discuss hockey. I don't think my way is the only way. I'm always open to new ideas and new things. And I ended up approaching TSN 690, and me and Sergio were up for the job. And when I was there, I ended up sharing the first year I was there, and it was a great experience for myself. I ended up doing some local regional games for the Canadiens on TV. Also, my only problem that I had being in Montreal is I never played for the Canadiens, and I wasn't francophone. Like, I could speak French pretty good. Growing up in Montreal, I learned how to speak French really well. But so I was a guy that was sort of in between. I never played for the Montreal Canadiens, and I'm not a French Canadian. So the French networks didn't really want me for the French part, and the English part, they wanted the alumni. So in the end, when it came up for a renewal, they said, Sergio was going to get the job full time. And I said, well, okay, no problem. And I ended up dabbling still a little bit for a little while after, but I came to my true calling, I believe, is teaching, teaching the game, coaching the game. It's always been with the youth movement. I had my own hockey school, my own hockey camps for the longest time. And then when I turned 35 and I found out that Peter Svoboda was one of the owners for the Lausanne Hockey Club, I contacted Peter and said, look, I'm 55 years old. I'm interested in trying something else. He says, give me a week. Call me back a week later. He says, okay, come on down. And the rest is history going forward. I dabbled in a lot of things, and it's always brought me full circle back into hockey, and here I am.
Bobby, your first NHL goal. Do you remember the scoring, and what can you tell us about that moment in your career?
Well, let me ask you guys, did anybody see it? Did anybody go out there and check it out? My first goal in the National Hockey League. It's hard to find.
That is one thing I did not check out.
Okay. And why I'm saying that, it was actually, if you Google it, you go on Steve Yzerman's 5-point night against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think it was his 4th or 5th point. He dangled a couple guys. I ended up picking it up. I was joining the rush. I came in on my backhand. I flipped it backhand right into the top corner, and you see the water bottle spinning out like that.
Oh, nice.
At Maple Leaf Gardens. I was so pumped. It took me 88 games to score my first goal. I thought it was never going to go in. And I could score. It just never went in. I finally got my first one, Maple Leaf Gardens, Detroit Red Wings. It was a great feeling. I still remember it like it was yesterday.
So I'm not sure about Rollo down there, but I know of the other two guys on here. I'm the only one to play defense. So let me ask you a question.
So you're the smart guy then. Okay.
That's right. I was also a backup goaltender. But so I look at some of the lists of players that you played with. I'm talking like 4 groups. We got Yzerman, Solane, Yager, Kovalev, you mentioned, Korea, just a great list of players. So if somebody's coming down on you one-on-one, who's the least player that you would want to face on a one-on-one during your playing time?
Well, that's a great question, because I did play with a lot and I did play against a lot. And I'll be honest, I think my choice went on his game when he was really into playing and stuff like that. Toughest guy one-on-one, bar none, Kovalev, bar none.
Wow.
You could ask a lot of guys, and I'm sure they would agree, when he's skating and moving, he's dangling, and he could use you for a screen. That little stick of his, he had a cannon, and a lot of people don't realize he played at around 220, 225. He was a strong man. He was a very strong man. All the skills in the world. the knock on Covey was, as we all know, he was a part-timer. Sometimes he was into it and sometimes he wasn't. But when he was on, I heard Jagger come out of his own mouth. Covey, when you're on, man, you're the best in the world. So I came out of Jagger's mouth in the dressing room.
Wow.
You know, I also heard Covey saying another thing. It's a bit of a funny thing here. You know, he told Darius Kasparaitis, out of all the talented Russian guys that we have in this league, why did we get you?
Wow. Fantastic. Well, I want to thank Bobby Dollas for joining us tonight. Just awesome to have it. You had a great career. I mean, you were really the backbone of that Ducks defense there for several years. So thank you so much for coming on. And we all want to wish you luck in your coaching position in Switzerland. And I know you mentioned you had a tour coming up of exhibitions. So we hope that goes well for you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hey, and you know what? If you want to check it out, you can check out some games on My Sport. It's you can get it on the internet. I'm sure you guys are probably live streaming. You could probably find it. It's actually great hockey. We picked up Michael Raffle this year, played in Dallas last year. There's a lot of NHLers coming here now due to the KHL with all what's going on over there. So the league is, picked up. There's 6 imports per team right now. A lot of great hockey players out there, and check it out. And it's a lot of fun. Trust me, it's a lot of fun.
Excellent. I will remind everybody, hit that subscribe button. It may not mean anything to you guys, but it means a lot to us when you hit that subscribe button. So make sure you hit it. We'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a great night.